Morning, grace and peace to you. Happy Wednesday. May the 4th be with you. I'm wearing my Star Wars short shirt, Star Wars Day. It's good to be with you today. My name is Paul Dezay. I'm the pastor at Sandy Hook United Methodist Church. On Wednesdays, I share a devotion and an update on upcoming events for Sandy Hook. And today's devotion is titled Saul's Zeal for Violence. This past Sunday, I preached on Acts chapter 9, and it's a story of Saul and his transformation on the Damascus Road. And one of the things that I mentioned is that Saul participated in an ancient tradition, a Jewish tradition called Zeal. And in the sermon, I didn't have time to explain that tradition and where it comes from and why he had it. But today in this devotion, I want to talk a little bit about Saul's zeal for violence. Saul would have been a faithful Jew, is raised as a Pharisee. He was obedient to the law, and he felt that his country, he was part of this tradition that felt that his country needed to get back to strict obedience to the Torah, to the law. And that would help initiate God's coming and restoring Israel and delivering them from the occupation of the Romans. And he believed that violence was necessary to purify Israel, to get rid of the bad people, to get rid of the bad influences. Everything really generates from this idea that the Israel is supposed to be different, supposed to be holy, supposed to live the way of Yahweh. And Paul or Saul believed that the influence of the nations, the Gentile nations, had crept into Israel and they committed idolatry and immorality. And that was disappointing God and keeping God away from this new Exodus, this deliverance that he was going to bring about via his Messiah. So that's where Saul comes in. So this ancient tradition called zeal, and this kind of belief that violence actually defeats evil, comes from Numbers, of all places. Numbers chapter 22 to 24 deals with the story of Balaam and the donkey. I don't know if you remember that. Balak, who was king of the Moabites, was threatened by Israel coming to the promised land. And so King Balak hired Balaam to curse Israel. And if you remember the talking donkey story, Balaam encountered this donkey, this angel on the road. And so Balaam turned back and did not curse Israel. So King Moabite, with the Israelites ready to come across the promised land, King Balak of the Moabites decided to do something else. And that was to send women across the border to the Israel camp, knowing that men who have wandered in the wilderness for a long period of time might be tempted to hook up with women. And that's exactly what happened. And so we pick up on Numbers chapter 25, verse 1. And check this out. I don't know if you remember this story, but it's kind of crazy. While Israel was staying in Shittim, the men began to indulge in sexual immorality with the Moabite women who invited them to sacrifices to their gods. The people ate and bowed before these gods, so Israel joined in worshiping the Baal of Peor, and the Lord's anger burned against them. And so the Lord said to Moses, "Take all the leaders of these people, kill them and expose them in broad daylight before the Lord, so the Lord's fierce anger may turn away from Israel." Verse 5. So Moses said to the Israel's judges, "Each of you must put to death those of your men who have joined in worshiping the Baal of Peor." Then an Israelite man brought his family, a Midian woman, right before the eyes of Moses and the whole assembly of Israel, while they were weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting. When Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, saw this, he left the assembly, took a spear in his hand, and followed the Israelite into his tent. He drove the spear through both of them, through the Israelite and into the woman's body. Then the plague against the Israelites was stopped, but those who died in the plague numbered 24,000. Verse 10. The Lord said to Moses, Phinehas, son of Eleazar, and son of Aaron, the priest, has turned away my anger from the Israelites, for he was zealous as I am for my honor among them, so that in my zeal I did not put an end to them. Therefore, tell him I am making my covenant of peace with him. He and his descendants will have a covenant of lasting priesthood, because he was zealous for my honor of his God and made atonement for the Israelites. All right, so this, my friends, is a crazy story. So the Moabite women come across, the guys are from Israel hooking up with these women, and then God is angry. So God says to Moses, hey, kill the leaders, kill the influencers. And then at that time, when they're weeping and all this is going on, an Israelite, really bold dude, takes a woman into his tent in front of Moses and everybody. Now, Phinehas, who is the grandson of Aaron, the high priest, he took a spear, went into the tent, and rammed it through both of them as they were in the act. Crazy, right? And it says that God kind of recognized and honored Phinehas for that act. He was zealous for God, and so he was kind of honored, right? He had a covenant with God, a covenant of peace, and Phinehas was recognized as doing the right thing, eliminating the impurity through violence. And so this mention of zealous several times in the text created this tradition for the Israelites called Zeal, which they believed that by being zealous for the Lord, by being willing to be violent to eliminate evil, they were doing the right thing. They were pleasing the Lord. Now, this makes sense, right? I mean, this story appears, if you read it without Jesus, if you just read it as it says in the Old Testament, it makes complete sense that Saul, a faithful Pharisee who had hope for God's deliverance to come to Israel once again, to follow in the footsteps of Phinehas and be zealous for the Lord, willing to use violence to eliminate the impurities amongst his people. That is the tradition of zeal. Now, Saul was part of that. And so on the Damascus Road, when Saul encountered Jesus, and I should say Jesus encountered Saul, this blinding light, Jesus asks Saul, why are you persecuting me? And so this violence, the stoning of Stephen, this violence that Saul was participating in was hurting God. So that in itself tells us that this whole zeal for violence that Phinehas was a part of doesn't line up with the ministry of Jesus. And so that causes a huge problem for interpretation of the Bible. Who do we listen to? Do we listen to the story from Numbers chapter 25? Or do we listen to Jesus, who speaks about peacemaking? He speaks about peace. He speaks about ways of nonviolence. Who wins? Does the story of Phinehas win, or does the story and the example of Jesus win? Well, obviously for Saul, when you take a look at his transformation, he moved from a very violent man to a non-violent man. He moved from a violent man to somebody who followed in the footsteps of Jesus. And so just in this example, we see this overarching theme within the Bible, specifically the New Testament, that Jesus is greater than Moses. Jesus is greater than these Old Testament stories. Jesus is the one we listen to. And so maybe Saul's zealousness for the Lord changed from violence to peace. He followed the way of the Prince of Peace, Jesus. And so Saul's life moved from violence to nonviolence. And may we do the same. For those of us who feel like this zeal for violence is necessary for God to move in our midst. In other words, we have to eliminate the impurities through violence. May we experience a transformation on our own Damascus Road, where God converts us from violence to peace. And so we believe that Jesus' way, the way of nonviolence, is the way that God desires us to follow. Now, that does not answer the questions, what do we do with that text when God said all of those things? That's for another devotion. That's for maybe a course on the Jesus lens and how you interpret these problem Old Testament passages. But we have to remember that Jesus always trumps the Old Testament. Jesus always is the one that we follow. On the Mount of Transfiguration, what did God say? God said, "This is my son whom I love. Listen to him." And so we listen to Jesus. So may that be helpful for you today. It's that we are called to nonviolence, that violence doesn't actually accomplish what we think it does. May that be helpful for you, because in our own ways we commit violence, maybe not with a spear, but with our words oftentimes and our thoughts. And so maybe we need to be purified of those thoughts and those words and encounter the Prince of Peace today. Some updates on a couple things. So this coming Sunday at Sandy Hook is Mother's Day. And so there's a breakfast for everybody in between the two services, 9:45 or whenever I'm done preaching. We'll have that breakfast down the fellowship hall. There'll be casseroles and coffee, of course, it's a requirement, juice, pastries, and then a gift for all women, because we honor all women, not just moms. We honor all women. So that's taking place between the two services. So, hey, come eat some breakfast, fellowship with your church family this Sunday, and celebrate all women of the church. The Formations Weekend Workshop that was scheduled for this weekend has been rescheduled for September 16th and 17th. I tell you, it is so hard to coordinate things on the calendar. Everybody's schedule is so full. And so when we were trying to coordinate that particular event, the only weekend that was open was Mother's Day weekend, which was a disaster, as you guys shared with us, that coordinating your schedules to attend just couldn't happen. So anyway, reschedule. Community yard sale. We need vendors Saturday, June 4th from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. Vendors are needed to sell their stuff. Maybe I should sell some books. Clean out your garage, spare rooms for items that you want to sell at your own booth. $20 gets you a parking space for your stuff and one for your car. Forms are now available for vendor spots at the Welcome Center and the registration next steps table at the back of the sanctuary. Help spread the words. Take one to your neighbor or coworker. We would love to double the number of vendors we had last year. Fall Bazaar planning meeting will take place on Monday, May 23rd at 6:30 at the church. Please contact Lynn Evans Coleman if you're interested in helping plan the events for Fall Bazaar. We have Revelation study tonight, and then pickleball 7:30 in the parking lot. Youth group is going to see Doctor Strange on Friday night at the movies. That information is in the newsletter. There is some UMC stuff happening in the news. So there's some links to that in the newsletter. So please keep updated on all the UMC stuff that's going on out there. I think that's it. Have a great day, everybody. Grace and peace to you.